The low murmur of the crowd was a beast I knew how to tame. From my vantage point in the wings, the ballroom glittered, a sea of expectant faces. My company, Novatech, was sponsoring tonight's charity gala, but the real prize, the one drawing the most buzz, was me. Or rather, dinner with me. My name is Natalie, and for years I've been the city's mystery CEO. Tonight, the mystery was about to get a very personal unveiling. "You've got that look," Ria said, materializing beside me. She was my COO, my best friend, and the only person on earth who knew every jagged edge of the story that had led to this night. She held a champagne flute, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. The one that says you're about to calmly dismantle someone's entire existence. I allowed myself a tight, humorless smile. "Just ensuring the scales are balanced, Ria. You know how I feel about symmetry?" My gaze swept over the opulent room, the chandeliers dripping crystals like frozen tears, the air thick with expensive perfume, and the clink of glasses. This was the world I moved in now, a world I'd built from ashes. Symmetry. Right. She took a pointed sip, her perfectly arched eyebrow conveying more than words ever could. "He's out there, you know. Saw him schmoozing by the silent auction tables. Table 7. Looks like a cat that not only got the cream, but also owns the dairy farm and is currently franchising it." A cold knot tightened in my stomach, but my expression remained impassive. "Let him," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "The higher they fly, the harder they fall. I know. Ria sighed, the sound barely audible above the din. Her usual brisk efficiency was softened by a genuine concern that always touched me, a reminder of the loyalty that had been my lifeline. "Just be careful, Nat. This isn't just business tonight." "It stopped being just business 7 years, 3 months and 12 days ago," I replied, the precision a familiar, bitter comfort. Every tick of the clock since then had been a countdown to this. On stage, Kaisen, the evening's charismatic MC, was warming up the crowd, his voice booming through the speakers. "All right, folks, let's keep those paddles high. Next up, we have a week-long escape to a sun-drenched Tuscan villa. Who wants to start the bidding at 10,000? The auction moved at a brisk pace. A vintage sports car, a bespoke jewellery set, a private yacht excursion, all snapped up by the city's elite, eager to display their generosity, or perhaps just their wealth. I watched, detached, my mind a whirl of carefully laid plans. Ria stood beside me, a silent, steady presence. She knew the script. She'd helped me write half of it. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Kaisen's voice took on a dramatic tone, silencing the chatter. The item you've all been waiting for. An exclusive opportunity, a chance to gain insights from one of the most innovative minds in the tech world today. A power dinner with the architect of Novatech's incredible success. The enigma, the legend, our very own mystery CEO. A wave of applause, louder this time, rippled through the ballroom. I felt Ria's hand briefly squeeze my arm. "Deep breaths," she murmured. "Do I hear 20,000? Kaisen boomed, his eyes scanning the eager faces. A paddle shot up from a table near the front. 20,000 from the lady in the dazzling emerald gown, a woman of excellent taste." 25, a man near the back called out, his voice slightly slurred. 30, another counted immediately. 35, my heart was a steady drum against my ribs. This was it. Years of planning, of rebuilding, of waiting, had converged on this single moment. 40,000! 50! The numbers climbed, a dizzying ascent. The air crackled with competitive energy. I could feel the weight of expectation, even hidden as I was. 70,000! A new voice, confident, almost arrogant, cut through the others. It came from table 7. I didn't need to see him. I knew that tone. It echoed in my nightmares. 80,000 from paddle number 72. Kaisen pointed towards a different section. 90,000! The arrogant voice again, louder this time, laced with impatience. My breath hitched. It was him. It had to be. My meticulously crafted trap was about to snap shut. 95! From paddle 72, a determined-looking woman with diamonds sparkling at her throat. A hush fell over the room. Kyson let the tension build, a master showman. Then, clear and distinct, slicing through the silence, $100,000! The voice was smooth, self-assured. The voice that had whispered promises of forever in my ear, then spun a web of devastating lies. Kyson's eyes scanned the room, then landed squarely on the bidder at table 7. $100,000! Going once, going twice. He paused dramatically, then slammed the gavel down with a resounding crack. Sold! For an incredible $100,000 to the distinguished gentleman right here, Mr. Peyton Meyer. The spotlight found him. Peyton. He stood, basking in the applause, a wide, charming smile plastered on his face. His arm was draped possessively around a stunning brunette I didn't recognize, who gazed at him adoringly. He looked every bit the successful, magnanimous entrepreneur he presented himself to be. He raised his paddle in a mock salute to the crowd, his eyes gleaming with triumph, oblivious. Utterly, blissfully oblivious. From the deep shadows of the wings, I watched him. A chill, not unpleasant, snaked down my spine. My lips curved into a smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that promises retribution. He had no idea. He was about to pay a very different kind of price for this dinner. "Show time," I murmured to Rhea, my voice devoid of any warmth, a sliver of ice. She just nodded, her expression a mixture of apprehension and fierce loyalty. "Break a leg, boss. Or his. Preferably his." I almost laughed. Almost. The curtain was about to rise on the final act of a play 7 years in the making, and Peyton, the unsuspecting fool, had just bought himself the starring role in his own spectacular downfall. The applause for Peyton washed over me, a distant roar. My mind wasn't in that glittering ballroom anymore. It was 7 years ago, in a cramped, sun-drenched apartment that smelled of fresh paint and cheap coffee. A place I'd once called home. A place I'd once believed was the start of forever. Peyton. Even his name tasted like ash in my mouth. Back then, he was all dazzling smiles and boundless energy. "Nat, baby, you won't believe this," he'd said, bursting through the door one evening, his eyes shining with an almost fanatical gleam. He'd spread blueprints across our tiny kitchen table, our shared kitchen table. "This is it. Project Chimera. It's going to revolutionize everything. Personalized AI assistance, but intuitive, truly adaptive. Think bigger than anything out there." He talked for hours, painting vivid pictures of a future where our lives were intertwined with this groundbreaking tech. He was so convincing, so passionate, and I, 24 and dizzy with love, hung on every word. We'd met at a local tech meetup. I was just a junior coder then, full of dreams and a surprising amount of savings. Every penny scraped together since I was 16, working after-school jobs, tutoring, taking on freelance gigs. My future fund, I called it. "We need seed money, Nat," he'd said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, his hand covering mine on the table. "Just enough to get the prototype built, to get the investors lining up. This is our shot." Our shot. Our. That was the word that did it. Our dreams, our future, our success. I remember the slight tremor in my hand as I signed the transfer papers at the bank, emptying my savings account. $57,000, my entire world, condensed into a string of digits flowing into his. To us, he'd toasted that night, cheap champagne fizzing in mismatched glasses. To Chimera, the wedding invitations had just gone out. A simple affair, a garden ceremony, all we could afford after the investment. I was humming, addressing the last few envelopes, 3 weeks to the day before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. I remember thinking how perfect everything was, how lucky I was. Then I came home. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Usually, Peyton would have music playing, or he'd be on a call, his voice animated. The apartment was still. Too still. My keys clattered on the small entryway table. "Peyton?" I called out, a tiny, unformed knot of unease tightening in my chest. His laptop was gone from the desk. His clothes were missing from the closet. The toothbrush holder in the bathroom held only mine. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. I raced to my laptop, fingers fumbling as I logged into our joint account, the one he'd insisted we opened for transparency. 0. A perfect, glaring 0. My savings. Gone. The small amount we'd had for wedding expenses. Gone. My calls went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's Peyton. Leave a message." His voice, cheerful and unconcerned, was a cruel mockery. The next few days were a blur of dawning horror. The eviction notice arrived first. Turns out, Peyton hadn't paid the rent in 2 months, despite assuring me he had. Then the call started. Credit card companies, loan sharks I'd never heard of. It wasn't just my savings he'd taken. He'd used my name, my social security number, information I'd shared in the blissful ignorance of love, to take out a string of predatory loans. My credit, meticulously built, was in ruins. I was homeless, penniless, and drowning in debt he'd accrued. My brother Dan was unhelpful. "Are you sure, Nat?" he'd asked over the phone, his voice laced with a skepticism that cut deeper than any creditor's demand. "Peyton? He seemed like such a good guy. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. Did you two have a fight?" He'd always been a little too easily charmed, a little too quick to believe the smooth surface. The implication was clear. Maybe this was somehow my fault. Maybe I'd driven him away. That conversation was the first crack in a bond I thought was unbreakable. But the real gut punch, the one that still made me physically sick to remember, came a week later. I was sifting through the wreckage of my digital life, trying to piece together what had happened, when I found it, buried in an old cloud drive, a file I'd forgotten about, my university capstone project, a detailed proposal for an intuitive, adaptive AI assistant, my idea, my research, my words, Project Chimera. He hadn't just stolen my money. He hadn't just stolen my identity and my security. He'd stolen my future, my intellectual property, the very spark of an idea I'd poured my heart into, enthusiastically sharing every detail with him over late-night talks, believing he was my biggest supporter. He'd taken May Dream, twisted it, and used it to destroy me. That was the betrayal that fueled the rage that eventually forged me into the woman standing in the wings of that ballroom, watching him preen. He hadn't just broken my heart, he'd tried to break my spirit. He almost succeeded. Almost. The applause died down, but the echo of Peyton's name, of his victory, still hung in the air. My fists were clenched so tight my nails bit into my palms. Back then, after he vanished, there was no applause, just the gnawing emptiness of Ria's spare room couch, the scratchy blanket a poor substitute for the life I'd lost. "You can stay as long as you need, Nat," Ria had said, her voice firm, but her eyes full of a pity I hated. She was working as a junior project manager then, barely making ends meet herself, but she didn't hesitate. She'd made countless cups of tea, listened to my incoherent sobbing, and held my hand while I made tearful calls to banks and credit agencies, trying to explain a situation that sounded like a soap opera plot. The debt collectors were relentless. "Ms. Walker, we have a payment due." "Ms. Walker, this is your final notice." Humiliation was a constant companion. I took a job scrubbing toilets in an office building at night, the smell of bleach clinging to me like a second skin. During the day, I served lukewarm coffee with a forced smile at a greasy spoon diner, the tips barely enough to cover bus fare. Each condescending glance, each dismissive wave, was a fresh stab of shame. There were days I didn't want to get off that couch, days the despair was a physical weight pressing me down. I was drowning. Then, one rainy Tuesday, staring at my own haggard reflection in a bus window, something snapped. It wasn't a dramatic lightning bolt, more like a slow cold burn starting deep in my gut. I was tired of crying. I was tired of being a victim. He'd taken everything, but he wouldn't take my fight. Not anymore. "I'm going to get it all back," I told Ria that night, my voice raspy but determined. "And then I'm going to make him pay." She just looked at me, a long, searching gaze. "Okay," she said finally. "What's the plan?" The plan started small. I found a bottom-rung tech support job at a small IT firm. The pay was terrible, the hours worse, but it was a foot back in the door of the world I understood. I answered calls, reset passwords, troubleshooted glitches. And I listened. I learned. I watched. I started taking online courses at night, relearning, updating my skills. The fire that Peyton had tried to extinguish was now a controlled burn, fueling an insatiable hunger to succeed, to prove not just him, but everyone who'd ever doubted me. Wrong. That's where I met Lloyd. He was a client, an older businessman with a kind smile and shrewd eyes, head of a mid-sized logistics company. I fixed a critical server issue for him late one Friday, something his own IT guys couldn't crack. He was impressed. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, young lady," he'd said, peering at me over his glasses. Wasted on a help desk. He became a mentor, a lifeline. He saw past the cheap suit I'd bought at a thrift store, past the lingering shadows under my eyes. He saw potential. Lloyd gave me a small project, then a bigger one. He listened to my ideas, the ones Peyton had stolen and twisted, and the new ones that were starting to bloom in the fertile ground of my anger and ambition. "This Nova concept of yours," he said one afternoon, tapping a proposal I'd nervously slid across his mahogany desk. "This has legs, Natalie. Real legs." He didn't just offer advice. He offered a small seed investment, a fraction of what Peyton had stolen. But it felt like a fortune. It was enough. Enough to rent a tiny office, buy a couple of second-hand computers, enough to officially register Novatech. Rhea, bless her loyal heart, quit her stable job to join me, taking a massive pay cut. "You think I'm letting you have all the fun?" she joked. But her belief in me was a rock. We worked like maniacs. 18-hour days were standard. Pizza boxes piled up. Sleep was a luxury. But with every small win, every new client, every line of code that brought my vision closer to reality, the rage I carried began to transform. It became focus. It became drive. It became a relentless pursuit of excellence. I wasn't just building a company, I was forging a weapon. And in the quiet hours, when the city slept, and Rhea had finally gone home, I started digging. Untraceable browsers, encrypted searches, skills I'd picked up in the darker corners of the internet. I needed to know. I found him, eventually. Living well, it seemed. Flaunting a lifestyle built on my stolen dreams, on my intellectual property. He was pitching a revolutionary AI platform to investors, using phrases, concepts, even diagrams that were chillingly familiar. He hadn't just moved on. He was thriving on my ruin, without a flicker of consequence. That was when the vague desire for him to pay solidified into a cold, hard certainty. It wasn't enough to just succeed. I needed him to see it. I needed him to understand what he'd done, who he'd tried to destroy. I needed a reckoning, and I would orchestrate it myself, on my terms, when he least expected it. The auction, the mystery CEO dinner. It had all been years in the making, a carefully constructed stage for his public humiliation. And tonight, he'd walked right into the spotlight I'd prepared. The buzz of the auction floor seemed to fade as I watched Peyton accept the congratulations of those around his table. He was smoother than ever, his designer suit impeccable, his smile practiced and dazzling. The woman beside him, Evelyn, I presumed from the guest list Rhea had discreetly procured, was gazing at him with an expression of pure adoration. It was a look I remembered seeing in my own mirror years ago. A bitter taste filled my mouth. "He hasn't changed a bit, has he?" Rhea murmured, her voice tight, as she joined me again in the shadows of the wings. She'd slipped away to check on some last-minute arrangements for my eventual appearance. "Predators rarely do," I replied, my eyes still fixed on him. He was laughing now, throwing his head back, the picture of carefree success. Every gesture, every carefully crafted expression of charm was a performance I knew intimately. It was like watching a rerun of a horror movie where only I knew the ending. A surge of cold fury, potent and familiar, washed through me, followed by a grim, almost detached satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place, exactly as I'd envisioned. "You okay?" Rhea touched my arm, her brow furrowed with concern. "You're practically vibrating." I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing the tremor in my hands to still. "I'm fine. More than fine. I offered her a thin smile. Just appreciating the symmetry of it all. She didn't look convinced, but let it go. Security is briefed. The AV team has your presentation queued. Kyson knows to give you a dramatic entrance. Good. My gaze drifted back to Peyton. He was holding court, expansive gestures accompanying his words, clearly the centre of attention at his table. He exuded an aura of unshakable confidence, the kind that comes from never having to face the consequences of your actions. Until tonight, a waiter, laden with a tray of empty glasses, squeezed past us. For a moment, the path to the backstage area was clear, and then Peyton decided to stretch his legs. He excused himself from his table, patting Evelyn's hand, and began to stroll towards the bar, which was uncomfortably close to our concealed position. My heart leapt into my throat. Rhea tensed beside me. This wasn't part of the plan. He was heading directly towards the narrow passage leading to the small, curtained-off alcove where we stood. "Shit!" Rhea breathed, her eyes wide. There was nowhere to go. We were trapped. He ambled closer, schmoozing with a couple he passed, his gaze sweeping idly around the periphery of the room. For a horrifying second, his eyes flicked towards the slight gap in the heavy velvet curtains that shielded us. I held my breath, every muscle rigid. My mind raced. If he saw me now, if he recognized me before the reveal. His gaze lingered for a fraction of a second, then dismissed the darkened alcove as just another part of the backstage setup, probably assuming it was for event stuff or storage. He turned his attention back to the glittering ballroom, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He walked right past, so close I could smell the faint, expensive scent of his cologne, a different brand than the one he used to wear, but just as cloying. He didn't see me. He didn't recognize the ghost of his past standing mere feet away. The relief was so intense it left me momentarily weak-kneed, but it was quickly followed by a fresh wave of icy resolve. He truly had forgotten. The woman whose life savings he'd plundered, whose dreams he'd shattered, whose identity he'd stolen. I was so insignificant to him that I could be standing right there, and he wouldn't even register my presence. The arrogance of it, the sheer, unadulterated narcissism, fanned the flames of my anger higher. Peyton reached the edge of the stage area, not far from where Kyson was now auctioning off a piece of modern art. He leaned against a pillar, looking pleased with himself, the conquering hero. Another man, portly and red-faced, approached him, clapping him on the shoulder. I couldn't hear their exact words over the auctioneer's patter, but snippets drifted towards me. "Brilliant move, Peyton, that dinner," the man boomed. Peyton chuckled, a low, confident sound. "Always looking for an edge, Arthur. You know me." Then, his voice lowered slightly, but I caught the words clearly, words that sent a chill down my spine despite the heat of my anger. "Speaking of edges, wait till you hear about my new venture, Project Phoenix. It's going to be game-changing. True AI synergy, predictive analytics like you've never seen. Project Phoenix." The name was different, but the buzzwords, the cadence, the sheer audacity of his pitch. It was Chimera all over again. My stolen idea, repackaged, resold. He was still running the same cons, just with a new coat of paint. My stomach churned. This wasn't just about my past anymore. It was about his present, and potentially Evelyn's future. The cycle was continuing, and I was the only one in this room who knew how to stop it. My resolve hardened from steel to diamond. He wasn't just going to be exposed, he was going to be obliterated. The art piece finally sold, and Kyson, ever the showman, moved on to a few smaller, quicker items. A spa package, a case of vintage wine. Each sale was another tick of the clock, bringing me closer to the moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times. My speech, the one I'd drafted and redrafted, memorized and rehearsed until the words were etched onto my soul, echoed silently in my head. "Good evening. Some of you know me as the CEO of Novatech, but Mr. Peyton Meyer, he knew me by a different name." Rhea, sensing the shift in my demeanour, the almost preternatural calm that had settled over me, gave a final, reassuring nod. "You've got this, Nat." Every word, every pause. "I know," I said, my voice quiet but firm. This wasn't just about the words anymore. It was about the weight behind them, the years of pain and meticulous planning that had led to this precise moment. Building Novatech from the ground up had been an act of defiance, a testament to my resilience. But this public evisceration was different. This was personal. This was about justice, raw and unfiltered. I thought of the late nights spent with private investigators, the carefully gathered evidence, the discreet inquiries into Peyton's other ventures. It hadn't been cheap, but every penny was an investment in this night. I'd made sure the narrative I was about to present wasn't just my word against his. It would be undeniable. What if he tries to deny it? Ria had asked me weeks ago, during one of our late-night strategy sessions in my office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in timelines and contingency plans. Let him, I'd replied, a cold smile touching my lips. The more he struggles, the deeper he'll sink. I have receipts, Ria, metaphorical and literal. The what-ifs still flickered at the edges of my mind. What if the crowd turned on me? What if they saw me as vindictive, cruel? I pushed the thoughts aside. This wasn't for them, not really. This was for the 24-year-old girl crying on a borrowed couch, for the humiliation of those debt collector calls, for the stolen dreams. This was for every person Peyton had ever conned, every life he'd casually damaged. This was karmic justice, served on a silver platter, right in the heart of the society he so desperately craved to impress. Kyson was winding down the last minor auction item. And sold, to the generous couple at table 12, he beamed. And now, folks, the moment we've truly been waiting for. A titan of industry, a visionary leader who has reshaped the tech landscape, all while maintaining an air of fascinating mystery. Please prepare to give a very warm welcome to the brilliant mind behind Novatech, our mystery CEO. My cue. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was it. No turning back. I took a shallow breath, my gaze fixed on the sliver of light visible between the heavy stage curtains. Then, just as Kyson was about to say my name, a movement near Peyton's table caught my eye. A late arrival was being greeted warmly by Peyton. A handshake, a familiar clap on the back. The man turned slightly, his face illuminated by the ambient light of the ballroom. My blood ran cold. It was Dan, my brother. He was smiling, looking impressed as Peyton gestured expansively, no doubt regaling him with tales of his supposed success. Dan, who hadn't returned my calls for weeks. Dan, who still, after all these years, harboured that sliver of doubt about what had really happened with Peyton. To see him there, with him, looking so comfortable, so admiring. It was a fresh stab of betrayal, sharper and more painful than I could have imagined. Peyton, oblivious to the storm brewing in the wings, was basking in Dan's attention, a picture of false respectability. He probably saw Dan as another potential mark, another connection to leverage. A new, harder resolve solidified within me. This wasn't just about Peyton anymore. This was about reclaiming my truth, not just in front of strangers, but in front of my own family. Dan needed to see. He needed to hear it, unfiltered, undeniable. He needed to understand the depth of the deception he'd so readily dismissed. The sight of them together, my betrayer and my estranged brother, side by side, erased any lingering hesitation, any flicker of doubt about the path I was about to take. The script in my head shifted subtly. The stakes had just been raised. This performance was no longer just for Peyton. It was for Dan too. And it was going to be unforgettable. Kyson's voice, amplified and enthusiastic, boomed through the ballroom. She's a powerhouse, a game changer, the architect of a multi-billion-dollar empire built from sheer grit and genius. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the one, the only, CEO of Novatech. This was it. Ria squeezed my arm backstage, a silent message of support. Go get him, she whispered, her eyes blazing with a fierce loyalty that momentarily warmed the ice in my veins. I took a deep breath, smoothed the front of my simple dark dress, a deliberate contrast to the glittering excess of the room, and stepped out from behind the curtain into the blinding glare of the spotlight. A wave of polite, expectant applause rippled through the crowd. Heads craned, eager to finally put a face to the name, to the mystery. I walked calmly towards the podium at the center of the stage, my heels clicking softly on the polished wood. My gaze swept across the room, a quick, assessing glance before landing squarely on table 7. Front and center, Peyton, Dan, Evelyn. The polite applause began to falter, dying away into pockets of confused murmurs. I saw Peyton's smile freeze, then melt away like wax under a flame. His eyes, moments before sparkling with smug satisfaction, widened. Confusion warred with a dawning, sickening horror as he stared at me. His champagne flute halfway to his lips. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, and in a way he had. Evelyn, sensing the abrupt shift in his demeanour, the sudden tension radiating from him, looked from Peyton to me, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in a frown. She clearly knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. And Dan, my brother, his jaw had literally dropped. He stared at me, then at Peyton, then back at me, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. The jovial expression he'd worn moments before was gone, replaced by a stunned disbelief. The shift in power was instantaneous, palpable. One moment, Peyton was the conquering hero, the generous benefactor. The next, he was a trapped animal, pinned by the unwavering beam of my gaze. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile, savouring the exquisite shock radiating from him. He knew. Oh, he knew. I reached the microphone, adjusted it slightly, the small movement amplified in the sudden, heavy silence that had fallen over the ballroom. The air crackled with unspoken questions. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice calm, steady, carrying easily through the room. I let my eyes drift over the assembled guests, a brief acknowledgement, before bringing them back to lock with Peyton's. He looked pale, almost green, under the stage lights. And a special thank you to Mr. Peyton Meyer for his incredibly generous bid. A smattering of polite, if somewhat hesitant, applause started up again, but I raised a hand, and it died instantly. I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build to an almost unbearable degree. His eyes were wide, frantic now, darting around as if seeking an escape route. There wasn't one. "Some of you know me as the CEO of Novatech," I continued, my voice even, almost conversational, yet laced with an undeniable authority. "A company I built from the ground up, with a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck." Another pause, shorter this time. "But Mr. Meyer," I let his name hang in the air, each syllable dripping with unspoken history. "He knew me by a different name, a long time ago." Peyton flinched, as if struck. Evelyn gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes darting between me and the man beside her, who now looked like he was about to be physically ill. Dan was frozen, his face ashen, the pieces visibly, painfully clicking into place in his mind. The rest of the room was utterly still, a sea of captivated, confused faces. They sensed drama, a scandal unfolding before their very eyes, far more riveting than any auction item. "Let me tell you all a story," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing them in. "A story about seed funding, trust, and the very high price of ambition." My gaze never left Peyton's. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling, revealing the panicked, deceitful creature beneath. The hunter had become the hunted, and the trap, 7 years in the making, had finally, irrevocably, sprung. The silence in the room was absolute, a breathless anticipation for the words I was about to unleash. 7 years ago, I began, my voice resonating with a chilling clarity in the pin-drop silence. I was a young woman with a dream, and like many young women with dreams, I also had a fiancé, a charming, ambitious man named Peyton. I didn't look away from him. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes darting wildly. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. "Peyton had a dream too," I continued, my tone even, almost detached, like a narrator recounting a well-known fable. "A revolutionary tech startup he called Project Chimera. He was passionate, convincing. He told me it would change the world, and he told me he needed seed money." I let that sink in. The audience was rapt, leaning forward, sensing the impending collision. Evelyn was openly staring at Peyton now, her earlier adoration replaced by a dawning horror. Dan looked like he'd been punched in the gut, his gaze fixed on me, his face a mixture of shock and dawning shame. Blinded by love, by trust, I gave him everything I had. My entire life savings, $57,000, money I'd scraped together since I was a teenager. My voice remained steady, but a tremor of the old pain, the raw memory of that betrayal, thrummed beneath the surface. 3 weeks before our wedding, I came home to an empty apartment, a drained bank account, and a fiancé who had vanished into thin air. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Whispers erupted, quickly shushed. Peyton visibly shrank, his shoulders hunching, his eyes darting towards the exits. 2 discreetly placed security guards, men I'd personally hired for the evening, shifted slightly, their presence a subtle but clear deterrent. "He didn't just take my money," I went on, my voice hardening, the carefully controlled calm beginning to fray, revealing the steel beneath. "He took my identity. He left me homeless, drowning in debts he'd accrued in my name. He nearly destroyed my credit, my reputation, my ability to even rent an apartment." I paused, then delivered the next blow with precision. "And Project Chimera? The revolutionary idea he'd sold me on? It was mine, my university capstone project, my intellectual property, stolen, twisted, and used to defraud me." The murmurs grew louder now, tinged with outrage. I saw faces in the crowd turning towards Peyton, their expressions ranging from disbelief to disgust. He looked like he was suffocating. "I spent years rebuilding," I said, my voice ringing with a hard-won strength. "I slept on couches, I worked menial jobs, but I fought, I learned. I built Novatech from the ashes of the life he tried to burn down. Every success, every milestone, was fueled by the memory of his betrayal. My company is built on genuine innovation, on integrity, on the very principles he spat on." I turned my gaze to Evelyn, her face pale, tears welling in her eyes. A flicker of genuine sympathy passed through me. "I'm sorry you had to hear this, Evelyn. Truly. But some truths need to be aired in the light." Then I turned back to Peyton, my voice dropping to an icy, lethal whisper. "But here's the part of the story you might not know, Peyton. The part I save for a special occasion like this." He looked up, a cornered animal, fear blazing in his eyes. "After you vanished," I said, my voice rising again, clear and damning. "I didn't just rebuild. I investigated. I hired professionals, because I had a feeling, a very strong feeling, that your dream project that bankrupted me wasn't just a failed venture. It was a meticulously designed sham, created for one purpose, to defraud." On a large screen behind me, previously dark, a simple, stark slide appeared. It listed no names, just dates and amounts, under the heading, "Peyton Meyer, a pattern of deception." And guess what I found, Peyton? My voice was laced with a chilling triumph. "I wasn't your first victim." The gasp from the crowd was audible this time, sharp and shocked. Peyton's face contorted in a mask of pure panic. "Oh no," I continued, a predatory smile playing on my lips. "There was a Jessica before me, a smaller con, but effective. And after me, after you'd perfected your technique with my life savings, there was a Sabrina. Different city, same MO. Small cons, all building up to your masterpiece with me, each one a stepping stone, funding your lifestyle, honing your skills of manipulation." Brief, anonymized summaries of these other instances flashed on the screen. Dates, locations, the nature of the investment, the subsequent disappearance of funds. Verifiable, damning. "You see, Peyton," I said, my voice like a whip crack, "you're not an entrepreneur. You're a parasite, a con artist who preys on trust, on affection, on dreams." Peyton finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate sound. This is slander. Lies, He tried to stand, to push back his chair, but he seemed rooted to the spot, his legs refusing to obey. Evelyn recoiled from him, as if he were diseased, tears streaming down her face. Dan buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The crowd was in an uproar now, a cacophony of shocked exclamations, angry murmurs, and a growing, undeniable wave of support for me. Some people were even starting to applaud, a slow, hesitant clap that grew in volume and intensity. Peyton was utterly exposed, his carefully crafted world shattered around him in a matter of minutes. his reputation, his charm, his entire persona, all reduced to dust. The spotlight that had once illuminated his triumph now cruelly exposed his disgrace. The reckoning had arrived, and it was devastating. The applause swelled, a roaring tide of vindication that washed over me. Peyton, ashen-faced and trembling, was swiftly and discreetly escorted out by the security guards. He didn't resist. He looked utterly broken, a deflated balloon of a man. The media, already present for the charity aspect, swarmed, flashes popping, microphones thrust forward. His public downfall was immediate and spectacular. Evelyn, her face streaked with tears and mascara, watched him go. Then, with a visible effort, she straightened her shoulders, her expression hardening from grief to a cold fury. She didn't spare him another glance before turning and walking out, head held high, dignity somehow intact despite the public humiliation. I felt a pang of respect for her. The ballroom was buzzing, a chaotic symphony of shocked chatter and excited speculation. Kyson, looking slightly dazed but ever the professional, quickly tried to regain control, but the main event was clearly over. As I stepped down from the stage, Rhea was there instantly, her eyes shining. "Natalie," she breathed. "That was biblical." She pulled me into a fierce hug. "You did it." "We did it," I corrected, leaning into her support for a moment. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving a strange hollowness in its wake. Then, a hesitant figure approached. Dan. His face was a wreck of shame and regret. Natalie, God, I don't know what to say." He looked utterly devastated, his eyes red-rimmed. "I am so sorry for everything, for not believing you, for being such a blind idiot." I looked at my brother, the man I'd once been so close to. The years of distance, of unspoken accusations, hung heavy between us. "It took you long enough, Dan," I said, my voice cooler than I intended, but the hurt was still there, a dull ache. "I know," he whispered, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me, not right away, but I see it now. I see him, and I see what he did to you, what I let him do by not standing by you." He looked up, his eyes pleading. Can we ever fix this?" "I don't know, Dan," I said honestly. "It's going to take time. A lot of time." An apology, even one as heartfelt as this, couldn't erase years of doubt and dismissal. But it was a start, a tiny, fragile seed of the hope. He nodded, understanding, a flicker of relief in his eyes that I hadn't slammed the door completely shut. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Peyton's empire, built on lies and stolen dreams, crumbled with astonishing speed. Business partners deserted him, investors pulled out, and the whispers of legal investigations grew louder. The evidence I'd presented, though anonymized, provided clear leads for authorities and other potential victims. His social ruin was absolute. Novatech, on the other hand, saw its stock price soar. The mystery CEO was a mystery no longer, and the story of my resilience, my fight back, captured the public imagination. There was criticism, of course, whispers that my revenge was too public, too ruthless. I didn't deny it. I'd embraced a harder version of myself to see this through, and I wouldn't apologize for it. He'd tried to destroy me. I'd simply held up a mirror to his actions. The satisfaction was undeniable, a profound, almost primal catharsis. Watching him fall, watching the scales finally, decisively tip, it was sweet. But it wasn't a magic wand. The scars were still there, faded perhaps, but a permanent part of my landscape. The years of struggle, the loneliness, the gnawing fear of failure, those couldn't be erased by one night of spectacular vengeance. A few weeks later, Rhea walked into my office, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Guess what just cleared?" she asked, holding up her tablet. Displayed on the screen was a bank transfer notification. $100,000. Peyton's winning bid. The irony wasn't lost on me. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked, settling into the chair opposite my desk. I leaned back, looking out at the city skyline, a view I'd fought tooth and nail for. The revenge had brought a form of closure, a harsh, undeniable rebalancing. But what now? The fire that had driven me for so long had, in a way, consumed its fuel. "I've been thinking," I said slowly. "All that pain, all that struggle, it shouldn't just be a weapon. It can be something more." I met Ria's gaze. "I'm going to use it, along with a portion of Novatech's increased profits, to start a foundation." Ria's eyebrows shot up. "A foundation? For what?" "For people like I was," I said. "Victims of financial fraud, people left with nothing, needing help to rebuild their lives, to fight back. We can offer legal aid, counselling, grants to start over." I felt a new kind of energy stirring within me, cleaner, brighter than the cold fire of revenge. Turn his dirty money and my hard-won success into something that actually helps, that empowers. Ria smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "That, Natalie, is the best kind of symmetry." She was right. The revenge had been necessary, a purging. But this felt like true power. Not the power to destroy, but the power to build, to heal. Not just myself, but others. The echo of justice was still there, satisfying and clear, but now it was harmonizing with a new note, one of purpose, of turning pain into a positive force. On my own terms. I still wasn't cured. Perhaps I never would be entirely. But I had reclaimed my story, my power, and in doing so, found a piece I hadn't realized I was missing. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. And it was mine.